panel discussion, which is From Narrative to Action, International Accreditations and Assurance of Learning. If you look at international accreditations, they are focused on maintaining the highest quality standards in higher education, not just in specific regions, but across the world. To be specific, in the business schools, there are accreditation bodies like AACSB, EQUIS, and AMBA, which comprises of the Triple Crown accreditation for any institution in the world. We at Woxsen are also striving to be a Triple Crown accredited institution in the next 5 years down the line. To begin with, I would like to welcome the moderator for the panel, Dr. Uma p.jaidev, Program Director, MBA General Program, School of Business, Woxsen University. Dr. Uma did her MBA in Marketing and then PhD in Management Sciences. Her specialization includes consumer behavior, advertising and brand management, digital and social media marketing, marketing metrics, and research areas include consumer reactance, mindful consumption, online advertising, and branding, amongst others. Thank you so much, Dr. Uma, for joining us. I'd like to welcome the first panel speaker, Dr. Evgeniapashkevich, Associate Dean, International Accreditations, IBS Moscow Business School. Dr. Pashkevich has an experience of more than 15 years in higher education. Prior to IBS Moscow, Dr. Pashkevich was appointed as Director of International Programs at IBS, Russian Academy of National Economy and Public Administration, in short, RANEPA. Thank you so much, Dr. Pashkevich, for joining us. And I would also like to welcome dr.Prasadpadmanabhan, Professor at St. Mary's University, United States. He's a prolific researcher, and Dr. Padmanabhan has published over more than 30 articles in several prominent professional and academic journals, including International Business Review, Journal of International Business Studies, Management International Review, and much more. He's also the Global Associate Editor for the Journal of Information Technology Care and Applications Research. He is also our Honorable Chair Professor at Woxsen University, and we are very happy to set up a chair in honor of the academic journey of Dr. Padmanabhan. And very shortly this evening, we will also have the opening of the finance studio, the launch of the finance studio, named in honor of Dr. Prasad. So thank you so much, Dr. Prasad, for joining us at the panel. I'd like to hand over to Dr. Umapjaidev for taking the lead in the panel.
It's a great privilege to be in this august gathering, and eminent people both from the industry as well as the academia. And Chad has already given an introduction to both our panelists today. So the topic that we're going to be discussing is about international accreditations and assurance of learning. And I do understand that all of you have had lunch and have come here post-lunch. First of all, the topic is a little bit heavy. And second of all, post-lunch sessions, you're bound to be sleepy. But the onus is on the moderator as well as the panelists to make this session as interesting as possible. So I have some goodies here, right? So relevant, useful questions to the panelists. People who ask from the audience will be given those goodies. They may not be great goodies, but then goodies are goodies at the end of the day. So let's begin. I would first like to address my question to both the panelists. Of course, Dr. Prasad has been in India, but has been living in the US for a long time, or for that matter in North America. And Dr. Pashkevich is coming from Russia. I would like to ask both of them that every country and the government of those particular countries have their own regulations and accrediting bodies when it comes to maintaining quality and maintaining continuous improvement of education. In that context, what is the relevance and the importance of independent underwriting bodies such as the AACSB or EQUIS, or for that matter, AMBA, is my first question to both the panelists. I now open the floor to the panelists.
All right. Thank you for this question. I remember it being first on our list. It's really quite an important question because certainly in our country, as I think in most other countries, there is a so-called government accreditation, which basically every university or every school that wants to operate and to what degrees has to have. And I would say that this is probably the main difference between the government accreditation and the accreditations from EFMD, CSB, AMBA, and many other accreditation agencies, is that the government accreditation sets the minimum requirements that have to be met for a school to be able to award degrees. So, of course, they look at the faculty qualifications, they look at the content, they look at the workload requirements, and many other things. But it's not something by which you can determine the quality of an institution because, like, again, in Russia, if you are a university or a business school in Russia, you are government accredited. There is no other option. Otherwise, you wouldn't be working there. Now, for students, for applicants, for other stakeholders, it does not say much about the quality of the programs. And this is, I think, the main difference, okay? Because if you look at the criteria, the requirements across all accrediting bodies and government accreditation, they will be pretty much the same, okay? It's the facilities, it's student services, it's the content of the program, it's the faculty qualifications and the assessment procedures and so on and so forth. But the difference would be in the content, in what's behind that. And this is what international accreditations really give a school. It's like a quality benchmark. And for stakeholders, for students, it's a sign that this school has reached a quality which is above, at least above the average. I'm done. What's up?
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Dr. Pamnik stole my thunder. I have nothing to say. No, the accreditation, international accreditation, it's one of the ways to compete with global competition in the academic area. If you look at what's going on, you have many schools from the US, Europe, establishing branch campuses in other countries, and they're competing with locals. So if one has domestic accreditation but not international, then you kind of have a competitive disadvantage in the global landscape. The programs you have are maybe excellent, but you need to get that brand recognition, to use a marketing term. And that brand recognition is critical because you got, for example, I went to McGill for my PhD. They have a branch campus in Tokyo, and New York University has branch campuses in China. So the question is that if local schools want to compete globally with global schools, accreditation is the minimum requirement. Quality is equal. I don't think there's anything that our local domestic schools have that international schools will somehow have better quality of programs. The thing is, it's a tool to recognize. It's a brand name that establishes. That's about 5-6%. Very few schools still have that because it's a lot of work to do it. I know. I mean, I lost my hair doing that. And I think, to echo sentiment, it is probably essential today to get a international accreditation as ACSB accredited or EQUIS or whatever that international accreditation is for every school that wants to compete in the global marketplace.
Thank you so much. So, my next question could probably be answered even by the dignitaries here, Dan as well as Dr. Sandeep. The question is, what is the approach that different business schools should take to obtain accreditations such as AACSB, Quiz, AMBA? How do you prioritize these accreditations? What are the focus of these accreditations? So I would want my panelists to answer, but before that, I also want the dignitaries to please answer this question.
Really? Okay. I think a good starting point for anything involving accreditation is to really take a good hard look at the school yourself, because they are different and have different strengths that will either align or not align with where the school wants to go. And I don't want this to seem like I'm avoiding the question, but I want to just make one sort of general statement. During the time I worked at AACSB, whenever I came across a school that was interested in pursuing accreditation, and often schools that were already involved, the one thing I would always say is, please make sure that accreditation helps you achieve your vision. Don't let it stand in the way. That's when it works best, right? So when the school clearly knows where it wants to go, and accreditation fits into that journey and even accelerates that journey to the vision, that's when it works. Don't try to change yourself in order to be accredited. Under those conditions, it almost never works. I hope that's helpful. And thanks for putting me on the spot.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Yeah, I don't know if I have much further to add. But in general, I believe that accreditation makes the school better. I think it really does, because I think it creates a discipline and makes the school pay attention to some areas that they would not pay attention to otherwise. So I view it as I think a lot of people are viewing it as a signal of external quality, but I think it also leads to better management practices. And there are some things that faculty will never focus upon, unless there is a pressure of accreditation. So I just think it is really something that helps, that brings best management practices internally. I also think that accreditation connects you to a learning community with the other deans and leaders in the other schools, which also I think is equally beneficial. So overall, I would absolutely recommend accreditation to business school in India as a way of clearly moving to a better kind of run school in terms of how they're able to articulate their mission and the strategic plan and sort of all their work, but also connects them to a larger international community. Like increasingly, for example, AACSB schools will only sign MOUs with other AACSB schools. So if you have internationalization ambitions, it is certainly helpful to be accredited, because they know that you're doing some things that they're doing as well. So it kind of equates you to partners in other institutions. So those are some suggestions. Thank you.
Thanks, both of you, for patiently answering my question. I will now continue my discussion with the panel. So, when we're talking about assurance of learning, although the term is specific to AACSB, I'm sure when it comes to continuous improvement, any other accrediting body, be it national or regional or international, will look at student outcomes as one of the important factors in assessing your quality. So, what do you have to further tell about ensuring assurance of learning on part of the students? How can business schools, how can faculty teaching business students ensure that learning has taken place, and how do we validate and conclude that yes, students have learned? How do we do that?
Me? Oh my God. Okay. All right. I'm going to go forward because I've been subjected to the pain of filling up assurance of learning results in my courses, and I spent 6 hours last semester because I'm doing 4 learning goals, different learning goals, finance, and I'm filling out forms, and give me a headache. But I think to make the point, you have to define your school. Is it a research school? Is it a teaching school? And once you do that, you have some standard guidelines. ACSB puts out standards that allows you to orient yourself, prepare for the accreditation. And once you've done that, your faculty has to be informed of what the process is. Assurance of learning, what we have done, we have found to be useful in my school, is to have one person in charge. At the end of the year, he runs around and says, I'm the most hated person on campus, because he's trying to force everybody to get the results. Your learning goals falls out of the mission and the vision statements. You have your learning goals, and then you test them. One of the things that we do, and perhaps there are other methods, other ways, is to introduce the learning goal in a class, educate the students on learning goals in a separate class, and a third class to measure what they have done. Can use external measures. We use the MFAT for many finance languages, not languages, finance, marketing, stuff like that, and then see how they did. Or we can administer tests inside the campus, inside the courses embedded, and sometimes where the materials are introduced and where they're measured is one and the same course. So it's a lot of work for the director, but it's very useful because it allows us to find out where we are deficient, which area students are not doing well. Give you an example. I teach international finance, but unfortunately, not every student takes international finance. So your finance major, IB major, but then when they do the MFATs, the testing, the one thing that came out was that the international finance area, a lot of students didn't do well. And then we went back and said, how come students are not doing well in international finance? And looked at me. Are you a lousy teacher? No. What happened was that a lot of students weren't getting it because they didn't take the class. They didn't take my class. So we had to change it and introduce that content in a finance class that everybody takes. So that's part of the continuous improvement. The other problem, I'm sorry, okay. The other problem is that we have to designate the bar, 70% acceptance. If you above 70, you're okay. What happens if you have 4 years of above 70 and you've met the bar, 70% of the students pass? Then should you change the bar or should you add another learning goal? That's a conundrum that people will have to decide among themselves. Sometimes changing the bar means you have higher standards, which means you might go back to the 60s instead of the 70s. That's the problem we have. And the other part is how often do you raise the bar? And maybe you want to test a different learning goal on top of the other ones you already done. And so the ACSB had introduced a new regulation that says indirect measures are important. And if you do direct measures, which is testing in the classroom, external exams, you might want to survey the industry to see how well your students are received in terms of their knowledge, and use that as a second measure. We are having difficulty with that, but we are trying to do that. And now ACSB has these societal improvement measures and new standards. What's your impact to society? How do you measure it? How do you continuous improvement process implies that you take all these into account and then you update your syllabus to reflect these changes. And then once you do that, make sure it ties in with the mission and the vision, and then keep going through the loop. I think I spoke too much.
I'll just take the mic. Thank you. So, when you said that the person who is in charge of assurance of learning is the most hated person on campus, so this is me. And I know very well the feeling because, I was and still am responsible for this particular area. And I could talk maybe for hours about, the rubrics and how we calculate the percentages and continuous improvement and everything, and we'll probably come to some of that later in the discussion. But what I wanted to start with is the evolution of the approach to assurance of learning within ASSB. As many of you probably know, until 2013, ASSB was not requiring direct assessment. That is course-embedded assessment, and indirect assessment, in fact, could be used. This is the employers' opinions and things like this. And then in 2013, they came up with this more formalized idea of assurance of learning, where you have to have goals, objectives, rubrics to assess the students in terms of each of the objective, and so on and so forth. And of course, schools who were looking for accreditation, they tried to comply with the requirements. So within almost 10 years, I think, of schools doing that, for some schools, it became so much of an effort that they actually created departments of assurance of learning where a dozen people would work. Because if you have a dozen programs, and maybe even more, and you have to assess every learning objective, every learning goal, then it really takes a lot of stuff, to do that, to involve the faculty. And this is the first and very important step, because faculty are normally not very enthusiastic about it. And then all the calculations, and then you have to close the loop, and it's really a lot of work. And we took this path, okay? We were, at that time, we started our ASSB journey in 2014. This is where the 2013 standards just came into force. And we built this assurance of learning system from scratch. And it was a great, nice assurance of learning system, very elaborate. When the peer review team came to our school and they looked at that and they said, could you make it a little simpler? We don't think that you need all that. And what happens, I think the feedback from many schools reached ASSB, and the new standards, 2020, ASSB standards, again, in a way, came back to standards before 2013, and indirect assessment is again allowed. So direct assessment is encouraged. It's good if you have it, but it's not like 100% necessary in all the instances. And I think it's actually better, because there are things that you cannot measure, but they are very important. For example, we talk about ethics and ethical behavior, okay? So you can measure it in a rubric that students understand the ethical consequences of their management decisions and so on and so forth. But it's not behavioral, it's only knowledge. We do not know how they will behave when they actually become managers. So we can probably assess it following their career over a dozen years, making sure no one goes to jail for corruption or something like this, but that's not feasible. So there are very many important things. They cannot be measured by direct assessment. So I've spoken too long, I think.
Yes. Without looking at accreditation as a big picture, if you were to look at us as individual teachers or faculty teaching higher education, how do you circumvent the challenges that are posed by measuring student outcomes or assurance of learning from as individuals, as individual faculty? What do you do? Because one, of course, you have the program learning goals, and then you have to map it with your course learning outcomes and so on and so forth. But in the classroom, when you get in front of the students and you are a subject matter expert, so to say, who have your own goals as to what you want to do in class, how do you align an individual faculty's goal with the program goal, and thereby ensure that the school as a whole is consistent with what we want to do in terms of student outcomes? So how do you, I'm sure my question is a bit elaborate, but I know you got the point, so please, I would like to hear your views on that.
Oh, well, that's a tough question. One of the temptations when you have these goals that everybody's AOL directors going to say, you got to do this, learning goals taught in your class and measured in your class, then you shouldn't, but you try to orient your education to meet the goals, meet the test. do the things to do the test. And that's a temptation that one should avoid. And the way I have handled it is I do what I have to do. I don't really worry about the goals, learning goals that you're talking about. And it happens, it happens. Otherwise, I get fired. No, I'm just kidding. The idea is that you faculty must be aware of what needs to be done. And if you teach your class, generally it is covered. And you don't have a goal that says you're going to be, very micromanage the goals. I mean, a lot of the goals, how you develop it is very important. You don't want to make it too narrow that unless you do that, you're dead. So you make it broad enough and accommodating enough so that the goals can be covered. So I do what I have to do. I mean, I don't look at the goals, and if something happens, I change it next time. I'm going to add something else. So the continuous improvement process brings into play.
I'll just add a few words, and thank you for this. Yes, I think it's very important if you don't have the goals and objectives yet. I'm sure every school has, but they're not just always formulated. But then when you start the accreditation journey, you have to formulate them properly so that everybody can see what they are. And it's very important not to devise some goals that just sound nice and that are trendy. And what we did, because then it will may be controversial to what you're actually doing. So what we did, we looked at our graduate profile, what we want our students to be, what kind of students we are preparing. And then we kind of describe this profile, and these are our goals. So that was pretty easy, basically. And of course, say implicitly all faculty members, of course, knew and understood that, but they just took some time to make it more explicit to them and to present the goals and objectives to them, and so that many of them could see that they were doing it anyway. It's just now being a little bit more formal and is now being assessed.
Yeah, one of the things we have found to be useful is tell them if you oral communication, written communication, and you try to measure their skill set on those counts, we make the rubrics available to them. Here's how you're going to be measured. And when you do that, the students do better because they're kind of orienting their presentations, communication through using the rubrics, and that improves their learning because rubrics are there for a reason, to improve the quality of students. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
So as you were talking about rubrics, my next question is related to rubrics. I was going to ask, how can we make the measurement of student outcomes more objective? And of course, rubrics are one way to do that. So how, apart from rubrics, what are the other instruments that we can use to measure student outcomes more objectively? I would also like you to throw some light on how do you construct or design rubrics? Can it be done at the course level, or do you think it can be done, it is better left done at the program level?
Well, as for the rubrics, I think, and as you rightly mentioned, the most important thing is to make the right rubrics, because sometimes you can be measuring something which is not the main thing, which cannot be measured properly, and then faculty will come up with arbitrary results. So basically, they will think, well, that student's what he's written makes sense, so I'll give him a plus, whatever. So it's very important. I think it should take a lot of time and a lot of effort, joint effort of the faculty, so that it's not just one faculty member. I'm not even talking about administrators. It should be the faculty who do this, who work on the rubrics. They shouldn't be very narrow, as you said. They shouldn't be, I would say, maybe very specific. When you just measure just one very narrow scale or something. But also regarding the question where the assessment should be actually performed? Should it be course embedded or something? From our experience, and I think maybe for the future we'll be sticking to that. Course embedded assessment is okay, but it's done by one faculty member, and it's not interdisciplinary. It's very important nowadays to assess the student skills in an interdisciplinary context. So we were doing a lot of assessment based on the bachelor or master thesis, when students have to demonstrate the interdisciplinary approach, as well as issues related to responsibility and sustainability. A section or a paragraph on that is compulsory, so they have to do that as well. But maybe the best way actually to assess what students have learned is something like a multidisciplinary project, especially if it's company-based. So I know it's a kind of complicated, but if the students can be observed in a real setting by company representatives and by faculty members when they are doing the project, that could really provide a more comprehensive and a more objective assessment.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. All right. I have a couple of things to add to that, and I'm thinking, and I could be wrong, that the oral communication, written communication, rubrics are very useful. I don't know what rubrics you're going to have for finance. It's right or wrong. I mean, I'm not sure that goes lends itself to rubric development. What he mentioned, that's very important, and I think when you start out, all of the AOL process, the learning goal development must be initiated by faculty. You can't have top-down management and say, this is what you do. Faculty-led initiative. So what we do is sit once or twice a semester and look at all the results that come out of the testing AOL process and say what is deficient, and we can collectively decide what remedies should be done, etc. And that's amenable for a smaller faculty, smaller school. In big schools, that could be a problem. So the problem we have is that we have maybe an MBA class, for example, in finance. I'm just using that as an example. We have multiple different faculty teaching the class, and there's maybe a difference in it's not apples to apples. One person's orientation may be different than somebody else's, and so the toughest time we have trying to communicate the learning goals for the new faculty coming in who has no idea what rubrics are. So that's our problem, and being a small school, that can lead to issues. So we haven't really firmed up the process of how we do that, except to say, here's the learning goal, you have to teach this, and they may get it, they may not get it. So when you try to have two people teaching, one established, one not so well established, try to merge the results, there could be variation. And that's how we found.
Of course, I had many discussion points to go, but when we are short of time, so I will put forth my last question to you. Now, when we're talking about assurance of learning, you have the institute per se, but then you also have the stakeholders, such as your recruiters, the larger community, the government, and so on. How do we align our goals, that is our learning goals, in a way that it balances all the stakeholders connected to an educational institute, and where does AOL fit in there? So that would be my last question.
Okay, I can answer that because I tend to forget quickly. We have stakeholders. We have ACES board. We have a business council who meets twice a year, maybe twice a semester, Fridays, and we ask them what is it that we should be looking at ahead. In fact, many of our programs, business analytics and accounting programs, got developed because of our interaction with the external business world. So they tell us, we need people with this is the future. And so it is very important to have external input into the process. And then we ask them questions like, hey, we have a problem. Our students are not meeting this learning goal. What do we do? And they give us feedback. We also have our employers. We have a career center that sends out questionnaires to our employers and ask them, what is it that our students are good at? What is it that they're not good at? And we use that feedback as an indirect measure to try to improve our program. So all of this is good, and it's very important because it's not just. I mean, ASCSB has continuous improvement too. I mean, that's different standards. They come up with different things, and that's good. We should have continuous improvement, and you can't have improvement if you're in a cocoon doing your own thing without looking at what the stakeholders want. You got to have an hour. Believe me, San Antonio, there's a lot of competition. Different schools vying for the same group of people. So it is challenging, but it's very, very important that you do that.
Okay, thank you. So when we talk about stakeholders, I think in our case, and not only in our case, in everybody's case, we should also remember about the regulatory bodies, not only the accreditation agencies that are kind of optional, but also, like, for example, we have federal educational standards that all institutions have to follow. I mean, otherwise you won't be able to award degrees. Fortunately, there is some flexibility in them, so some things cannot be changed and students have to be taught certain things. But there is a lot of flexibility. Let's say 40% of the curriculum can be done or designed according to the school's decision. And of course, it's up to the school then to decide what say the stakeholders have. And the stakeholders are many, and then accreditation agencies would be one. And then there's, of course, the students themselves and the employers, and more and more now the larger society. And we see that in all the accreditation standards, its societal impact in ASSB, its ethics, sustainability, responsibility in AQUIS, and its sustainable development goals in the new BJA accreditation developed by EMBA, or jointly with EMBA. So what we do to gather opinions, well, of course, with accreditation agencies, it's simple. We know what they want from their documents. But we also have like advisory boards, which is comprised of industry representatives, our alumni. That's very important because those are people who studied with us. They know how we work. And when they go out into the world and start working, they understand what they are lacking, what they should have been taught, but were not when they were students. And we also, strangely, sometimes invite student parents when we talk about undergraduate students, because in our country, students start their bachelor degrees sometimes when they're 17. So they're basically still underage. So it's important what their parents think as well. And of course, representatives of the student council. And I would say that it's not easy, but it's not impossible to take into account the interests of all the stakeholders, as long as there is some flexibility in the design of the program.
So, excuse me. So thank you very much, Dr. Prasad and Dr. Pashkevich, for sharing your insights. That is so very important as we've begun our accreditation journey for the larger audience as well. I will now open the floor for some questions from the audience quickly, maybe next 5 minutes. So please raise your hands. The mics will come to you, and you can pose your questions to the panelists as well as any of the dignitaries that you think would be able to answer. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Abhishek, and my question is, well, let me give you a premise. So I understand that an institution or a university needs to meet certain guidelines, regulations, norms to get these accreditations. For example, if there is a great initiative that a university is planning to start, but it thinks, okay, if I do this, I might lose a few points on the accreditation part. So doesn't the road for getting accreditation curtail a university's creativity or table a lot of great ideas?
Well, yes, thank you for the question. It's actually a very big discussion point. Okay, and I think especially in ASSB, where inspiration, engagement, creativity is one of the underlying standards, so to say, it has been discussed very often that don't be afraid to be creative. Even if you fail, it still shows that you've tried to do something. So when you're trying to do new things, when you're trying to do something creative, if you fail, it's still a result, and you cannot be taking points off if that happens. Of course, it depends to what degree you do this. If you're being constantly creative and failing 90% of the time, then maybe you should be a little less creative. But I think most accreditation agencies are quite understanding in this respect, and that they, in fact, encourage very much creativity.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that. ACSB or any accreditation body doesn't require it to be perfect. It requires you to provide a basis for continuous improvement. And in my view, what ACSB done for us is to make us more efficient. And when you have more efficient, you're able to do things that you might not have thought that you could do before, uh, except that it's recorded. Now, for example, societal impact. Now, that provides a service for students because you have to measure, to do the societal impact, measure it, so students can do community service. But then it also provides the impetus for faculty to write a paper on that. And so you kind of channel a lot of activity in a more efficient way. So it doesn't throttle innovation. It doesn't say you have to get it right. It says continuous improvement. Where's the evidence? Show us the evidence. And that works.
And my question is, how are staff or the faculties evaluated by the accreditation team, and how curriculum plays an important role during the process of accreditation?
Okay. I'm not sure I got the question right, but I'll try to answer it anyway. So, faculty performance is supposed to be assessed quite formally in some cases. And I think this is, well, for us, was one of the things why accreditation was good to us. Okay. So, we have faculty assessment, faculty performance assessment, of course, and that's a requirement, but that was kind of a little bit. Without real content, so to say. So the faculty were given points on quite formal basis. For example, service was never taken into account. It was just teaching and research, and all other important things were not really taken into account. And I think all accreditation standards of all leading accreditation agencies call for a more comprehensive faculty performance assessment or evaluation would be a better word. So that's actually benefits the school when they start the accreditation.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think what ACSB requires schools to do is to have a faculty development plan, and that should be initiated by the faculty, not by the deans. Sorry. When you do that, it is laid out. If you do this many papers, you get this points, and if you do that many papers, you teach well, you get this points. Your service points that can give you raises. It can also give you tenure, etc., promotion. But the each school should really do their own basis for evaluating faculty performance. But the ACSB doesn't say faculty shall be doing this and this and that. That's up to the school. But once what they want is a plan, a transparent plan developed by faculty that measures performance by faculty in a formal way. That's it.